Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Daily Devotions. Pastor Dino here with you on this wonderful Monday morning. Hope you had a great weekend. We had a wonderful time in church, and we want to welcome those on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram. Thank you for joining with us. On Friday, we left off chapter 4, looking at the woman at the well, tremendous life lessons that we were able to glean from her experience with Jesus. And we left off verse number 39 and 40, 41. And we want to finish chapter 4 and go into chapter 5, one of my favorite chapters in the book of John. Notice here that many Samaritans from the village believed in Jesus because the woman had said, "He told me everything I ever did." This is verse 39. Jesus, of course, is the omnipresent one, the omniscient one. Remember, the book of John speaks of Jesus' deity. This was the purpose of John, to let everyone know that Jesus is not just a prophet, but or he is the Son of God, but God himself, one with the Father. In verse 40, when they came out to see him, they begged him to stay in the village, so he stayed for 2 days, long enough for many more to hear the message and believe. And they proclaimed here, "Now we know he indeed is the Savior of the world." Did you see that? These are the people here in Samaria. They experienced, they heard, and they experienced. They heard, they saw, and experienced. And there it is. So, what is salvation? It's not just hearing, but it's experiencing. See, knowledge without experience means nothing. And they begged him to stay. They begged him, and we notice in verse 43, and at the end of 2 days, Jesus went on to Galilee. And so they begged him, and Jesus stayed. Notice here in verse number 40, they begged him to stay in their village, so he stayed 2 days, long enough for them to see more of God's power and grace. Verse 43, and so at the end of these 2 days, Jesus went on to Galilee, and he himself had said that a prophet is not honored in his own hometown. He said that about Nazareth. And he says this generally, and this is true for anyone, not just Jesus. He even talks about a prophet. If you're a true man of God, woman of God, and you have a prophetic ministry, or if you're just following God and you're serving him and you're proclaiming his word and you're living a life that's pleasing to God, you can be sure there'll be opposition, especially in your home. Your family might reject you. That happened to me. When I gave my life to Christ, everyone thought I lost my mind. And I've shared this before. I got saved in Los Angeles. My mother thought something's wrong with Dino. She sent my sister to check up on me, see what's going on. And after a little while, she went crazy too. She gave her life to Christ because she saw something. She experienced something. And she said, "Dino, if you believe in God, there has to be a God." And one thing led to another. She gave her life to Christ, and her life was changed. But my family didn't receive me. My relatives didn't receive me. They ridiculed me. They mocked me. Who are you now to tell us about God? Who do you think you are? And so a prophet or a man of God is not honored in his own hometown, yet the Galileans welcomed him. So we see now, yet the Galileans welcomed him, for he had been in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, and he had seen everything he did there. And so, now watch this now. As he traveled through Galilee, remember his headquarters was in Capernaum, Galilee, he came to Cana. Now this is the second time we see Cana. Most people don't know this. They kind of pass over this. We all know about the first miracle in Cana. We read this in John 2, the wedding, turning the water into wine. But did you know there was another miracle that took place in Cana? We visited Cana when we went to Israel last time. It's a small little town. Look, it says, traveled through Galilee, came to Cana where he had turned the water into wine. Okay, we know that story, but watch this now. And there was a government official, a nobleman, in nearby Capernaum, whose son was very sick. And he heard that Jesus had come from Judah to Galilee, and he went and begged him. He begged him, implored him, "Jesus, come to Capernaum to heal his son who was about to die." Jesus asked, "Will you never believe in me unless you see miraculous signs and wonders?" And how true that is. Well, we'll only believe if we see. They said this about Jesus, and they say this today. But Jesus says, blessed are those who believe and have not seen. You know, friends, even if you see miracles, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to believe. You know how many people saw miracles that Jesus did, yet they didn't believe? You know how many people I've even prayed for who were not really believers? They received a miracle, and they still didn't believe. And I prayed for a man who had stomach cancer years ago. His sister was an atheist. But somehow she said, I'll ask Dino to go and pray for him. You know, maybe something will happen. And I tried to let her know that anything that happens comes from God. And so I went to St. Hubert Hospital in Montreal to pray for her brother, Nelson, who had stomach cancer. And didn't look very good for him. And so I fasted and prayed, went there, prayed for him. I asked him, do you believe? He says, well, I'm not sure, he said. I said, but I shared the gospel with him. He claimed to receive Christ. I said, I'm going to pray for you. And when I prayed for him, a couple of days later, the doctors were dumbfounded. They found no trace of cancer in his stomach. And he was ecstatic. Carol's ecstatic. And I said, now, Nelson, you got to commit yourself to Christ. Give your life over to Christ completely. He's done a miracle. No man can do this. It was documented. The doctors were dumbfounded. This was a bona fide miracle. What did he do? He didn't go to church, didn't commit to God. He went to Cancun, Mexico to party, to have fun. Rejected everything God, just I want to live it up. Well, I'm sad to say that Nelson didn't make it. And he died. He actually mysteriously died. I'm not saying that happens all the time. I'm just saying it's a terrible thing to mock God. And we're going to find out what Jesus said to a man that he healed. He said, be careful that you do not sin. Because something worse can happen to you. And this is what happened to Nelson. He said to me, and this is what I'm trying to say, yeah, I'll believe if he heals me. So he claimed to believe a little bit, but I'll believe more if I see a miracle. Well, he didn't. How many people have seen miracles, but they still don't believe? Jesus brought Lazarus from the dead, and they still didn't believe, some of them. So don't think that because God does the miraculous, that necessarily means that you're going to start believing. That could happen, because that does happen. In Samaria, we just found out that many people believe because of what happened through the testimony of this woman at the well. But that doesn't mean everyone's going to believe. They'll try to justify it or try to use natural reasoning. Well, you know, sometimes these things happen and it's not really a miracle. You know, these things can happen naturally, and they'll go on and on, trying to bring logic, trying to explain miracles through the natural realm, and you can't do that. Now notice what happens here. Will you never believe in me unless you see a miraculous sign? Jesus, of course, understood this. Verse 49, and the official pleaded, Lord, please come now before my little boy dies. Then Jesus told him, go back to your home, your son will live. Wow. Did you see that? Just go home, your son's going to live. Now, how can you know that? How can you say, unless you're God? Again, the book of John speaks of the deity of Christ, and here we see his deity. And the man believed what Jesus said and started home. While the man was on his way, some of his servants met him with the news that his son was alive and well. And he asked them when the boy had begun to get better, and they replied, yesterday afternoon at 1 o'clock, his fever suddenly disappeared. Then the father realized that was the very time Jesus told him, your son will live. And he and his entire household believed in Jesus. Did we see this before? It happened before. In Luke 7, remember the centurion had a servant. He was sick, and he wanted Jesus to come and to meet him and pray with him. And Jesus talked to him and spoke to him. And in fact, later he said, you don't even have to come, just say the word. So he's concerned about his servant. This man had so much faith in Christ. You didn't have to come even and pray for him. I just believe whatever you say. If you say he's healed, he's going to be healed. And that's exactly what happened. As he went home, he found that his servant was healed. Do we see this somewhere else? Yes, we do. The fair Phoenician woman in Matthew 15. Her daughter was possessed with the devil. She came to seek deliverance on behalf of her daughter, and her faith pursued, and Jesus healed her daughter, and he never touched her. Incredible. It's incredible when you see these things. You see, friends, Jesus heals from a distance because he's God. He just has to speak the word. Doesn't have to lay hands or touch you. We see these miracles coming from a distance. And so we see another one here. This is the second, verse 43. Watch this now. Miraculous sign did in Galilee after coming from Judah. We see these miracles in Cana in Galilee. It's a powerful thing. Jesus just spoke the word. Friends, he just speaks the word. You know, they pray something, Lord, you're praying for people. You're praying for your brother, your sister. You're praying for God to touch it. God can bring healing. You don't need, in fact, even when you feel you have got to bring them to church. I know the Bible tells us that we are to lay hands on the sick and they shall recover, but that doesn't have to happen all the time. God is God. You can just go before the Lord, say, Lord, bring healing to my son, bring healing to my daughter, to my father. You believe and you trust and you seek the Lord and you cry out to him. God can bring healing from a distance because he's God. And he's got power to heal. And that power to heal exists today. Notice now, chapter 5, we see something incredible happening here. One of my favorite chapters. Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for the Jewish holidays. Inside the city near the sheep gate was a pool of Bethesda. And so we talked about Cana. I went to Cana with Logos. But we also went to the pool of Bethesda, where we see a great miracle taking place. And Lord willing, when we go back to Israel in May, we'll be going to visit this site as well. One of my favorite sites, still exists today, with 5 covered porches. And the crowds of sick people, blind, lame, and paralyzed, lay on the porches. And one of the men laying there had been sick for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, would you like to get healed? Interesting. Would you like to get healed? Why would Jesus ask this? Well, there was a reason. First of all, this pool of Bethesda became a healing sanctuary, if you will, for crowds of people that were sick. It became like ghettos for the sick. So they would all get there. They would just come. And they were waiting for something to take place. The King James makes it more clear because in chapter 5, it says here that in verse number 3, there lay a great multitude of impotent folk, blind, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into a pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first after the troubling of the water stepped in, made whole whatever disease they had. So there was a tradition that stems from reality. And what this was is that once a year, an angel would come and stir the waters, and the first person that would go into the pool would be healed. Now, this portion is not in every manuscript, but it's here. And the King James speaks of this. And we see that that's the backdrop. We see that this lame man talks about this, and he says something here. And I want you to notice. He said, when Jesus saw him, he said, would you get well? Then he says, watch. I can't, sir, verse 7,